Let's let everybody in. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm just going to allow people to come in and settle. So just take a moment to maybe have a glass of water, have a pen and paper handy maybe. Lovely. There we go. Good. So just as a heads up, we are concurrently streaming live on Facebook, and this is going to be recorded. So everyone who's registered will send you a link for the recording. I'm just letting more people in. So just a heads up that it's not a private closed space. Good. So I'm just going to give a couple more minutes, see if anybody else is coming in, and then we'll start. There we go. It's just good. Lovely. Okay. So I'm going to ask everyone to stay on mute just to manage the background sounds. And if you have questions, just pop them in the chat. So what I'm going to do now, so that I don't forget to do it, is I have some useful information. It's a bit on how you can get hold of me, some useful links. Let's see, does that work? Yeah, hopefully that works. I just did a cut and paste. There we go. Lovely. I don't know if the links have worked, but we'll see. I can try that again anyway. Lovely. Oh, Richard. Okay. Okay. So just a tiny bit housekeeping. Can I have a thumbs up if you can hear me? I just want to make sure everything's working. Yay! That's great. So hopefully it should only be me that's visible in the recording if it goes the way I mean it to. But just in case, if you really don't want to be on screen, you're welcome to turn your camera off. And like I mentioned before, anybody who's registered will get a copy. So if you have like a technology fail or some emergency comes up and you have to leave the session early, I will be sending a link to the recording, so you'll be able to catch up another time if you need to. Great. Let's just see, let's let a couple more people in. Great. So yeah, I just want to thank you all for being here. I'm always really touched when there's so many people interested in this area, because there's something that's really close to my heart that I've been working in for a long time. And I guess part of the reason why I really feel, the call to share all this information is that I think, cancer is something that touches everybody in one way or another. It's so prevalent. And I feel that it would be lovely if all teachers had some skills to work with people who are living with cancer. So I'm going to give you a little overview of, my experience working with that, to give you a little insight into what it's like in reality, because it's one thing maybe to read a book or have the theory about it, but yeah, I just wanted to chat a little bit about what my experience has been like working with people with cancer. And then I'm going to go over some key skills that I think all teachers could benefit from, with some top tips that you can take away today and put into practice. And I'm going to save time at the end for a Q&A, so that if there's anything that you specifically wanted answering, yeah, do feel free to pop that in the chat. I'll have a little read through at the end and pick out some questions. And if I don't have time, because we're only here for an hour, to go through everything, I will follow up with an email if I can, because I think I will have your names and emails on the Zoom registration. So if I don't have chance to answer your question, don't worry, I'll get in touch afterwards and help you if I can. Okay, so just checking. Oh, we've got one more person coming in. Lovely. Okay, so there we go. So yeah, just to give you a little overview, I suppose, of how I started working in this area. I first qualified as a reflexologist when I was looking for a major career change out of the city. And soon as I qualified, I started volunteering in my local hospice. And that's where I first started working with people with cancer. There are a lot of people, you know, with other illnesses as well, but the predominant, you know, the most common condition was cancer. And it was something that I found really interesting. And I loved how there were all these ways that we can help people that didn't involve administering drugs. You know, obviously they need their medical treatment, but there were so many other things that they needed as well in terms of their personal support going through that journey. So I started doing that with reflexology. And then from there, I moved into CancerKin, which is a charity that was specifically for breast cancer. So I got a lot of experience working there. And then I also started teaching yoga there for CancerKin. And now I work for Maggie's at the Royal Free, and I'm the yoga teacher there. So all in all, you know, in one way or another, I've been working with cancer for about 20 years. So it's always been part of my practice and something that I felt quite passionate about. And I guess for me with my yoga, I kind of started the training on the back of recommending all my reflexology clients really should practice yoga. So yeah, that's where I decided that I wanted to train as well. So I always thought of yoga as more of a therapeutic modality, more than simply an exercise. And, you know, I guess all of us are aware that yoga is so much more than exercise. I think that's why we're all here doing this. But yeah, so in terms of teaching, I notice when I have conversations with other people that they may feel a little bit apprehensive about maybe working with a room full of people who all have cancer. And there may be some concern that, you know, maybe it's a very sort of serious or heavy environment. But ironically, I have to say, I think my cancer classes have been probably some of the most joyful classes that I teach over the years. I've found that it has a lot of humor. And I think there's something about when people are dealing with a really serious illness that it does tend to put a lot of things into perspective in life generally. So quite often there is this sort of feeling of, well, let's not sweat the small stuff. And there's an openness and a connection there that I don't always get in other classes. And I think particularly with my Maggie's class, you know, because everybody is there for a cancer diagnosis, and they're in a centre that's specifically there for cancer support. There's a real sense of camaraderie there. And the class itself, I think, is more than the yoga class, it's also a little bit of a support group. So people often would arrive early, they chat to each other, they discuss their medication, they discuss which consultant they're seeing. You know, and I started taking my little singing bowl into class just to get everyone to shush so we could actually start yoga. So they were all, you know, chatting to each other and having a great time. And I really enjoy that aspect, you know, that there's that connection there, you know, and people feeling very at ease with each other. And I think at ease with me as well. And, you know, there's a couple of instances that come to mind of things that people, you might think would be really embarrassing or awkward situations, but actually were either a bit humorous or no one batted an eyelid. So we were in one class transitioning from hands and knees, coming up to standing, sort of in a slow roll up. And during that movement, one lady, her prosthetic breast fell out onto the floor, and she just picked it up and stuck it on the windowsill and then carried on, which I loved because no one else batted an eyelid. They all knew what it was and they weren't shocked. It was like, oh, that's happened. And she just carried on with her class. And the fact that it was no big deal, for me, sort of showed the value of being in that class, that they felt so safe and comfortable, that they didn't have to explain anything, that they didn't have to feel awkward. And it's the sort of thing I imagine, like if she was, getting something off the bottom shelf in a supermarket and that happened, she might have felt mortified, but in her yoga class, she didn't. Um, so I think, sometimes the way we support people can be unexpected. Sorry, I just need some water. That we can offer a space where people can just really let go and be themselves, and not feel like their cancer is something that they have to hide, or something that they need to be careful with other people and how they might react, so we're creating this space. And so that was something that I found really valuable, and I really like having the kind of connection with my students where they can talk about what's going on for them, and we can sort of have a bit more of a deeper therapeutic relationship, which is something that I like in my work anyway. And it kind of leads me into part of these sort of 4 key areas that over the years I've found have been sort of the main areas to develop, I think, to be able to support people with cancer and also create a sustainable practice. So when we're kind of providing this space for other people, and where they can feel really at ease and really comfortable, there's something that as a teacher we need to be able to create that space for them. So part of that will be around having good boundaries and communication skills, so that we kind of create this container. And those boundaries are really useful for both us as teachers and for students, so everybody's kind of really clear about the rules of the class, about turning up on time, and whatever your terms and conditions are. But there's also more personal boundaries in that teacher-student relationship as well, in terms of how we connect with students and make sure that we're not projecting our own issues onto them. So sometimes when we're working in an area, it may be that we sort of have quite personal reasons for wanting to work in that area. Maybe we've been affected by it and then we want to support other people. So we have to be really mindful that we're not trying to fulfill our personal needs when we're teaching other people, that we're sort of more there as a blank canvas to support other people. So although we can perhaps share that we understand other people's situation, and it can be up to you about how much you want to share about your own story, it's just being really careful that it doesn't turn into you having a conversation or teaching in a way that's more about what you need. And it's very easy just to slightly tip into that. And so that also comes into the whole area as well, around building up support networks and our own self-care, so that we have our needs met outside of the yoga class. So we need our own support network. Um, and I really recommend everybody have a think about their own self-care. And in the course that I just run, part of the homework was actually to create a self-care plan. Because if we are going to turn up at a class where people have, you know, serious things going on in their life, and we want to create this really strong container for them, we need to be a strong container. And we can only do that if we're coming from a place of being well met. So, you know, if we're turning up in a class where, you know, we're emotionally and physically wrung out and on the verge of burnout and exhaustion, even though we may smile and put on a brave face with it, energetically people pick it up. And it may be on an unconscious level, but they will sense that, you know, the teacher is fragile, and that in turn will make them feel a bit less safe and less supported, you know, like this container isn't as strong. And so although it may feel initially counterintuitive to start off thinking about your own needs, I think when we're in a profession where we're giving to other people and trying to hold space for other people, that we need to make sure that, you know, we're strong and healthy to do that. So as a little tip to take away, I'd really recommend just having a look at your week, um, and seeing, are there, you know, is there room for improvement in your own self-care, you know, from basic things like maybe making sure you get enough sleep if that's possible. You know, are you in any kind of support group? Do you have peers that you can get support from? Even things like having cover teachers lined up, you know, all of these ways that we can find support as teachers, I think is really important. So that then we're nicely topped up to give to other people. And I think one of my favorite sayings is, you can't pour from an empty cup. You know, if we want to give, we've got to fill up first. So that's something that I would really recommend doing. And just while I think about it, when we're talking about communication skills and boundaries, there's a lovely book here. It's Donna Farhi's book called Teaching Yoga. I will drop it in the chat. So it's exploring the teacher-student relationship, and it's a really good book I'd recommend for all teachers, whatever kind of yoga you teach, just to dive a bit deeper into what does it mean to be a yoga teacher? What is that relationship you have with your students? Like, who are you being for them? How do they see you? And although often we don't feel it, we are in a position of power, you know, being the teacher at the head of the class. And what we say in class or as a teacher carries more weight than, you know, than having a chat with a friend who knows we're a yoga teacher. But if we're in that role of being a yoga teacher, then what we say, I think, does get taken more seriously. So another boundary issue, for example, is to be really careful about what kind of advice we might give, you know, and making sure that we only give qualified advice, so that we could, you know, advise them in terms of their yoga practice. But if they were asking for, you know, advice on nutrition, possibly because they know that maybe you live a healthy lifestyle and you might know a bit about nutrition, just to be really careful that unless you are a nutritionist, you're not in a position to give that advice. So just being really clear about, you know, what our role is as a teacher, and the ways that we can support them, but also being clear about the ways that we can't support them. So the other side of the support networks is the support networks for the students as well, that when you're clear about what you can't offer, to then maybe seek out other resources, other professionals, charities, that can fill those gaps. So if someone does ask you something and you're not able to do that, you could then say, oh, look, it's not really my place to give dietary advice, but I know a really good nutritionist who works with cancer. You might like to call them. So yeah, I think that's also the other side. So we want our own support network to support us so that we can sustain this practice long term, and also a support network for the students so that we can refer on when we need to. So in terms of communication skills, I think there's a lot that gets said that comes from a really well-meaning place, but isn't always that helpful. And I've heard some real horror stories from some students when they've recounted conversations that they've had with people, where things haven't been hugely helpful. So a few common things that come up, which I would say avoid saying. When somebody does perhaps have that conversation with you to let you know that they have a diagnosis, first thing not to say is, how long have you got? Because I found it shocking, but it does come up. People sort of assume still these days that that it's a life sentence, and they kind of just kind of have that reflex and that shock to make that assumption, which is really unhelpful for the person who's trying to have that conversation. I think also the other thing that happens a lot is recounting somebody else's story. So that someone may say, oh, look, I had my lump investigated and it turns out actually I do have breast cancer. And then the person they're talking to says, oh yeah, my Aunt Margaret died of that, or go into some other horror story, which again then makes the conversation not about that person who's telling their story and looking for support. It's then making it about the person that they're talking to. So there are a couple of things to really avoid saying. I think also in terms of advice, a lot of people get offered unsolicited advice, and it comes from a really good place of people are wanting to help, but they dive in with, oh, I was just reading an article the other day and there's this great new detox juice diet that they're doing in Switzerland. I'm going to send you the article, you need to read up on it, this will be really useful for you. And often what people are experiencing when they first get their diagnosis, and actually throughout their treatment, is overwhelm. That they're already trying to process the reality of their diagnosis, trying to understand the treatment protocol that's just been recommended to them, and then also the ripple effects that go out into their lives in terms of, does this mean they're taking time off work, and how does that affect their income? Does it put their job in jeopardy if they are going to be exhausted through chemotherapy and need to isolate because their immune system's down? Who's going to take the kids to school? And if they're having surgery and they can't do their normal chores, is there someone else who can do that? And they have a million things that they're trying to juggle. So trying to to then give them another to-do list of other things to research is not actually that helpful. So I would save that for if they ask for it. But it's good to be aware that the impact of a diagnosis and the treatment is more than the physical. What spreads out into the rest of their life is huge. And it can also have an impact in terms of their own self-image, their identity. Again, if it means that they're not doing their job for a long period of time, how does that make them feel about who they are? And if they're used to being a very active, successful, responsible, high achieving individual, to then have a long-term illness which makes them vulnerable and need to ask for help, you know, it's going to affect how they feel about who they are. And again, the physical impact of the treatment and the surgery has an impact on their self-image in terms of their body, both in what they're physically capable of doing and their appearance. Can have an impact on, you know, how they feel as, you know, as a sexual person and in their relationships. It can affect how they feel as a parent if they, you know, if they don't feel that they're able to give to their kids in the same way. So when we're working with people with cancer, it's not just the physical impact maybe of surgery and chemotherapy and working therapeutically with that. It's working with the whole person and every layer that gets affected. And this is why I think yoga is so powerful, because we've got our lovely asana practice to help with that physical rehabilitation. But we also have our breathing practices that can really help with the stress and the anxiety. We have our restorative practices, which are wonderful for the fatigue. And fatigue is a big issue in cancer. Pretty much every single treatment has a side effect of fatigue. So that's something that's really useful, that we can offer as well. So I think quite often when people are thinking about working with cancer, we sort of dive in straight away thinking about, right, what asanas are good for this and what practices are good for that, and perhaps thinking of maybe in a more literal way of what asana practice is good for bone cancer was a question that I had. And really, I would go back to the beginning of asking that person, what is it that they need? You know, when we think of the way that they're affected universally, because we're not offering yoga as a cure, we're offering it as a support to help them through the process. And also, it's kind of what I'd call an adjunct therapy. So people who practice yoga regularly through their treatment do have better outcomes. And if they continue practicing, they have better long-term outcomes. So you can't promise for an individual, but generally speaking, when people practice yoga, they do cope better with their treatment and live longer on average statistically. But again, we can't ever say that for an individual, that we can guarantee it. But to get back to what I was saying, I think we need to, when we're looking holistically at somebody, you know, it's maybe asking, you know, what's going on for them and what do they need help with. And it may be that, you know, the anxiety, which is causing insomnia, is the big thing that they want to deal with. For other people, it might be that they want to come to class because they want to regain their mobility in their shoulder and their arm and prevent lymphedema if they've had breast cancer surgery. A lot of people will want a bit of everything. So yes, it's more looking holistically at somebody and looking at all the practices that we can offer to help on every level, you know. And for some people, you know, it might be the breathing practices and meditation, or some yoga nidra that's going to be the most powerful and most useful thing for them. So just to remember that it's not just asana, however wonderful that is. I think we need to use all of our tools that we have. So yes, I'm aware. So I always find this hard to divide into logical things because everything's interconnected. But I was aware also I wanted to give some tips to take away. So the things that I've written down. So yeah, one main area is around understanding cancer and its impact on people. So if you wanted to find out a little bit more about the medical treatment and the side effects for that, I would use Cancer Research and Macmillan and NHS websites. They're really informative. And Cancer Research as well has kind of two sides to its website, one for the public and one for healthcare professionals. And there's also research in there as well. But I mean, and I still use those things because I don't know every drug that's out there. That's not my training. I'm not an oncology nurse. So yeah, if you're wanting to understand how somebody may be affected, that's quite a good starting point to, if you're having a chat with somebody, and if they're able at that point to tell you what treatment they're having, then you can look that up. And if you have an understanding then of what they're going through, then you can look at your yoga toolkit to see what would be suitable practices for them. So that would be my top tip for having a bit of a better understanding of what they're going through. In terms of communication skills, which is another huge area that we cover, yeah, my most basic top tip would be assume nothing when someone tells you they have a diagnosis, because everyone reacts differently. So the way I would approach it is just to ask simple, open questions, just to acknowledge, yes, oh, that's really big news. How do you feel about that? How would you like to be supported? Would you like to continue yoga? Like, it's very empowering then to leave it with that person to tell you what they want, rather than assuming how they might feel or what they might want. Because I've seen polar opposite reactions in cancer patients. I've had students in my class who genuinely see their diagnosis as a blessing, that it was a wake-up call for everything that didn't work in their life. It was a chance to stop. They completely changed their life. They kind of went deep with their spiritual practice, and for them, it was almost the best thing that happened. For other people, it's the absolute opposite. That they may feel that it's so unfair. This is the worst thing that's ever happened. I've always lived healthy. I've done the right things. Why is this happening to me? I don't understand. This is awful. So you can have both of those and everything in between. So I find the safest thing is just not to assume at all how somebody's feeling. And also to really listen. We ask the questions, and then what's quite a difficult thing to do, because we're often thinking about the next thing that we want to say, is to try and stop that process, ask an open question, and then just listen to what they say, and then maybe take some time to think before responding. So it's just allowing them that space to ask for what they need. So for when we're thinking about lesson planning and delivering classes, again, it's a huge area. So I guess my first top tip is to think about what people want from the class. The second thing is to not design a class and then think about how you can get people with cancer to do that, so that we're not getting them to adapt to the yoga you want to teach. It's more thinking about, well, what do I have in my yoga toolkit that will serve what they need? So I find there's a lot of parallels with pregnancy. Yes, you can integrate pregnant women into a general class, and that's fine, but I feel that going to a specialist pregnancy class actually serves them better, because they're going to learn really specific things that's going to prepare them for birth and give them tools that help with what they're going on. And it's the same with cancer, that you can integrate into a general class, and that is great, but also to think about what their needs are, rather than getting them to find a way to adapt to fit in, if that makes sense. So we're trying to give them things that's actually beneficial for them. And one of the ways that we can help deliver postures or any practice is to break it down into stages and start with the simplest, most accessible version of that everyone can do. So everyone is doing the same thing and nobody's being left out or made to feel different. And then from that, you can offer a whole range of variations so that everyone has the chance to work in the way that best suits them. And I tend to veer away from the idea of a hierarchy in any practice, you know, that there's this linear progression of becoming more and more advanced, because that does tend to encourage people maybe to push themselves to do something that's not necessarily helpful because they want to feel like they're achieving. So I like to offer a lot of varieties and maybe plant the idea that advanced yoga is when you're really able to listen to your body and honor it, you know, or maybe being advanced in this practice is keeping your mind steady and not comparing yourself to other people, that we give other ways rather than, you know, often the way that I learn in asana practice is like, here's the simple basic version for beginners, here's the intermediate version, and here's the advanced version. And yeah, so people often, you know, and it's in our culture that's striving to achieve or want to push themselves to achieve this advanced version, even though it's perhaps not good for their body. So those would be my tips around designing a class and delivering. And then, yeah, we talked a bit about already the support networks and self-care. So again, I would look up some resources so you can refer on for things that you're not able to offer. And then also have a look at your own self-care and your own support network, and making sure that's in place so that you're really well resourced. And actually, you know, this doesn't have to just be a thing for working with cancer. You know, I'm really aware that burnout is quite a big issue for teachers universally, and I see it a lot in the chats on Facebook. Their teachers are working really hard, and often at the expense of their own well-being. So I think there's a little bit of just stepping back and taking stock of, you know, what is our week like and is that sustainable? I think that was my new word a couple of years ago, and I realized I was in this cycle of huge activity and then exhaustion and activity and exhaustion, and actually what I needed to do was be realistic about what I can achieve week in, week out. And yeah, so it's looking at a sustainable way of working. So those are my ramblings about working with cancer. So I wanted to give a decent amount of time for some Q&A, because often people do arrive in these conversations with some specific questions. So let me just have a little look in the chat. Hang on a minute, I'm just going to close that bit so I can read a bit better. There we go. So what are your thoughts on working alongside an individual's physio to see what their recommendations are and see how they can be incorporated into class? I speak as someone who doesn't have any doctor referral training. My mum had a visual sheet with exercises from the physio and thought this would be useful, but don't know if this blurs the line between teaching outside of your expertise. No, I think it's really good to work with a physio. And generally, though, what I've found when I've looked at physio sheets is like, oh, that's all the yoga I would be doing anyway. You know, there's a lot of overlap between physios and yoga. So yes, I think that's a really useful thing, that You know, if someone has had surgery and they've been given a sheet of exercises to do, absolutely incorporate them into your class. There's no reason why you can't replicate. If they've given them a sheet to practice at home, where they're effectively self-teaching, then I don't feel that it's beyond our expertise to have a look at those exercises and incorporate them into a class. And as I say, a lot of the time there are things in there that I recognise as practices that I teach anyway. And while I'm thinking of that, there is another book, and I'll put both of these in the chat, that I really recommend. This is Structural Yoga Therapy, Mukunda Stiles. Again, if you in any way work therapeutically with yoga, I find that's a really useful book. And there's lots of stuff in there that I found really helpful when I'm working with cancer. But again, it's a universal book for anyone teaching. But the reason I thought of that is that there's a lot of things in there that I see crop up on physio sheets. So, okay, next question. Is there a time scale after surgery or chemo when students shouldn't do asana? And are there any red flags? Okay, I think this comes into having a good intake form, or maybe a PARQ, which is a physical activity readiness questionnaire, where you would ask the students to certify that they have been given the okay to start doing some kind of movement practice. You're never well, I say never. I've not heard of anyone getting a letter from anyone's oncologist giving them permission to do a yoga class. So we kind of have to rely on the students themselves. So I think if we have a disclaimer to say that it's their responsibility to check in with their medical team. Is it okay for them to do some exercise? And if that's the case, then we can start working with them in a really gentle way. Generally, people are more cautious than cavalier. So yeah, generally it's not too much of an issue, but that's the way that I deal with it, because I'm not medically trained. It's not for me to say whether it's suitable to for them to be in class or not. But if they have been given clearance to do some kind of exercise, then I feel it's within my expertise to work out how we do that. But as a general rule, I think it's still recommended to have 6 weeks after surgery before doing exercise, although with some physio they do ask them to start almost immediately. So yeah, it's case by case, but yes, I would have something signed if someone's got a serious illness or they've had surgery recently, to say that they're taking the responsibility. Let me just come back through here, see if I can. Sorry, the scroll is very jumpy. How can teachers move into working with people with cancer voluntary first? Yeah, there's a few different ways. It could be that you I mean, a lot of people work with cancer because they have people in their general classes who have a diagnosis. So I think that's often the first way that, you know, in particular if you have long-term clients, you know, the chances are after enough years that, you know, some of them may have a diagnosis. So that's one way that people do work with cancer. You can also work one-to-one with people. I do that privately as well as the charity class that I do. And it can be, I mean, it's interesting to do voluntary work. I always think it's important to have an exchange of some kind. I do think there's a pressure on kind of complementary therapy field as a whole to somehow do it for the love and for our big hearts, and that we somehow don't actually have bills to pay, you know. And you can have situations where everyone else is being paid, but they want the therapist to do it for nothing. So I do have a little bit of a be in my bonnet about being paid for what we do. So I think particularly when we've done our years and years of training and our CPD and our extra training, that we should be paid for that. Sometimes volunteering can be a way in, but again, have boundaries around that, and have in mind maybe something you'd like in exchange. So if an organisation is not in a position to pay you for a class, that maybe you could use that class almost as a research project, or it may be that there's an opportunity to advertise your other classes, or to invite people to come to your paid class. Yeah, there might be some other exchange that you would like, or it could be ongoing training, extra supervision. It could be that they organize your DBS check. There could be other benefits that you have. But yeah, so that could be a way. I would, if it's something that you want to do, then maybe just contacting local organizations, seeing, do they run a yoga class? And if they don't, would they like to? And if they would like to, do they have a budget for it? And kind of take it from there, really. It's my short answer. So Julie, do you think there is a benefit for people with a history of cancer teaching yoga to cancer patients? I think there is, but I do think there needs to be some self-reflection first, because I think it does potentially bring up issues that may be triggering for that person. And I think the teacher would need to perhaps just have a little bit of self-reflection about what is their motivation for teaching, because it may on the surface be this real need to, or this real desire to pass on the benefits, so that they found yoga was so helpful for them during their treatment, they really want to do that for other people. I usually find it's good to have a little bit of gap between your own experience and then working with other people. And in fact, the first hospice where I volunteered, they said, within the last 2 years, if you've had a diagnosis or anyone in your family has had a diagnosis of cancer, they didn't want you to volunteer there because they felt it would be too raw an issue. So I don't have set in stone guidelines around that. I think it can be hugely beneficial when someone has done that journey to then teach other people, because they have another level of insight. But it's just good to make sure that they've worked on all their own stuff and all their own issues around it, so that they're not trying to fulfill some unmet need in themselves through teaching, if that makes sense. Pat, how frequently do you find that people don't know what they need, or there's a mismatch between what they think they need and might work for them? Yes, I mean, in some ways that's quite universal. That level of self-awareness that people have. So they might have an idea of what they want, but what they need is something different. I think it's something, that you can kind of unpick with a conversation with somebody. And, often, people can be in denial or suppressing certain feelings. And I've certainly, had in-person conversations with somebody who's sat there jigging their legs up and down and fiddling their fingers, who's telling me that they're not stressed. So they're so kind of separated from what's going on with them that maybe their normal level of stress is way higher and this is lower than normal. So there can be a mismatch, but I think there's ways of working with that, where, and I think maybe the mismatch can come from more A-type personalities who might just dive in with, right, I want to deal with this. I want an action plan. I want to be here in 6 months, and they're used to planning and organizing. Um, and so, yeah, I think it's managing their expectations and perhaps just starting them with something gentler. Um, and yeah, kind of perhaps explaining that there are what the benefits are of restorative things. So it might be just almost like a little education process where um where we explain the benefits of things that they might initially be resistant to, because they might feel they want to do some more rigorous exercise and actually that's not the most useful thing for them. So if we can explain, actually, if you do these practices and the pranayama, um, it's actually going to help you recover quicker. So it's a little bit of a sales pitch sometimes, just to help people understand why we're recommending what we're recommending. um, let's have a little look. Um, is it a personal feeling just after a chemo treatment? Most people wouldn't feel like it. Fatigue, nausea, etc. Yeah, so it's good to have an understanding with chemotherapy that they usually go in cycles, and typically 3-week cycles. And in that first week after a treatment, the effects can be the strongest, and people may feel really exhausted. Um, Nausea generally is not as much of an issue now, because they've got some really good anti-nausea tablets they give people. But yes, there is a cycle of feeling, the fatigue, the taste changes, and sometimes low mood comes with that as well. So yeah, it may be that we adjust the class or their practice according to where they are in the cycle. People do still come to class, and I find actually with Zoom, it makes it so much easier because they don't have to leave the house. So even if they're tired, they usually can just turn their laptop on. And again, this is where, getting back to the lesson planning side of things and how we deliver a class, when we say to people, listen into your body, do what's appropriate for you today. And if actually coming down to lie in shavasana while other people are doing a warrior pose is the right thing for you, then you're being really fantastic yogi. So yeah, people can continue a class all the way through, as long as it's adapted to people's needs as they go. And this is where we need to get away from the idea of a linear progression, because often it's a cyclical thing, and they might feel like their energy is improving and they feel stronger, then they have their next dose and then they go back round again. So you're not going to have this idea of a 12-week course where people improve all the way through that. I guess what we hope would improve is maybe their knowledge and their understanding of they might build up their experience of yoga. But in terms of a conventional physical development, that's not necessarily something that always happens in yoga classes. Just keeping an eye on the time. Do Maggies pay me? Yes, they do. So it's free to anybody who comes to the class, accesses the class for free. And then I get paid by Maggies. So that's how that works. From Heather, you mentioned evidence of improved outcomes. Yes, if you go to my website, there's a blog in there about, can yoga be considered as a treatment, and at the bottom there are links there to research. But yes, I don't know if that was done in the UK or the US, but they did some research, I think, on breast cancer patients, and it was quite a long study, but they did have better outcomes. So I love it when I find bits of research like that, because it just backs up the things that we know to be true, but often people say, well, yeah, but can you prove it? So it's nice when we start to build up evidence of that. Um, and also it's a very useful thing to have when we're trying to argue for, implementing yoga classes within the NHS, or within healthcare services, say, well, look, actually it works very well in conjunction with the medical treatment. If you want people to cope better and have less recurrence, long term, it might save the NHS money if they start paying yoga teachers to run classes. I would love that to be the case, that it becomes standard, that alongside all the medical treatments, that, physio is now incorporated in the NHS. It wasn't many years ago. So yeah, it would be lovely if we had yoga incorporated too. So we've got 5 minutes left. I did just want to mention, if you go to the top of the chat, there's 4 websites there which are quite useful for information on cancer. So there's Macmillan and Cancer Research. Cancer Active is a good site for, again, more research, but also into kind of complementary therapies as well, like other nutrition and supplements and things. That's quite an interesting read. And there's a link to Maggie's there as well, which is a really lovely support organisation, and it's national. So if there's one near you, it's good to know about it, just to recommend to people. Julie, perfect timing. Are there training courses you would recommend? Well, yes, mine. There are a few training courses out there. So I'm going to be running a half-day workshop in April. So let me just remind myself of when that is. Yes, I'm going to be running the half-day workshop in April. And at the moment, we've got the early bird price of £45 until the end of this month, and then it goes up to 55. And you can find that on the Yoga Teachers Forum website. You can book through there. And then I'm also doing a more in-depth 6-week training in June. So we'll meet 2 hours a week, once a week for 6 weeks, with kind of homework and reading in between. And yeah, that's again on an early bird price at the moment, of 145 till the end of April, and then that goes up to 195. So we wanted to keep things at a very affordable price, just being aware that it's been a really tough year for yoga teachers, and not everyone's at their full earning, so that's why we're keeping the prices down for the time being. So it's a good opportunity to get in. So Lucy, will these links and info, what I'm going to do is, when I send the link to this talk, I will also add in links to the training and also links to the other websites that were useful, and I'll give you details of the 2 books that I recommended. Yes, the training is done online in June. And I think we're going to keep that online, from the feedback that we've had so far, in that people found it really useful that it cut out all the travel issues. And we had people from all over the UK and America. So rather than asking everyone to schlep down to Finchley, we can do that at home. And let's just click that. So we're going to keep those online. And the other thing actually that we do have online, if you just want to dip your toe in or have a little self-study before doing a more intensive course, there is an online self-study module that we have up as well on the Teachers Forum, and that's only 15 quid. So you can do that in your own time. Everything's pre-recorded with information on there. So that can be quite a nice introduction if you just want to expand a bit on some of the areas that we've covered. Um, Lovely. So I'm aware of time. Um, oh, just the last thing, is your course BWI accredited? I think so. I'm a British Wheel teacher, so I think, but I will have to check with Julia for that. Um, Lovely. And would this training be suitable for a Pilates teacher? Yes, I don't see why not, actually. You know, again, there's a lot of overlap there, and it's a very similar therapeutic relationship. For someone on teacher training, it can be. I think it's a bit more challenging because it does involve writing a lesson plan and, you know, sort of writing intake forms. So I think if you're towards the end of your teacher training, then I think it would be suitable. I think if you're at the beginning of your teacher training, it's going to be too much of a leap because it's a postgraduate module really. Um, Lovely. Claire, can you go? Yes, you can go straight into the 6-week training. Yeah, you know, if you're a qualified teacher, and say, or you're just on the verge of qualifying, then yes, you can go straight into the 6-week training. But yeah, for people who are perhaps a little bit more cautious or not quite sure if it's an area that they want to work in, then maybe the half-day workshop or the online module could be like a nice introductory level. But yes, if you feel like this is something you want to do, you can go straight into the 6-week training, no problem at all. Lovely. Great. So last chance for any questions before we sign out. Are we all good? Lovely. Oh, well, thank you all for being here. I say it's so lovely to have so many people interested in this area. I would love there to be nationwide loads of teachers out there who can support people with cancer, because you know we are getting to a stage now where nearly 50% of the population are having a diagnosis at one point or another. So there's a lot of people out there who need our support. So yes, hopefully our paths will cross again at some point in the future, and wish you a lovely rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Great. Thank you very much. Cheers.